Hello, everyone. This is another collaboration episode with Pekingnology and Baiguan Newsletters. I am your host, Robert Wu, founder of Baiguan Newsletter and CEO of Baiguan Lab. And with me is my co-host, Zichen Wang of Pekingnology. Every week, we as two friends will share our own unscripted views about the top news items of the last week and top things to anticipate in the week ahead. You may access these episodes by subscribing to our newsletters on Substack, or search for either Peking Playbook or Baiguan Radio on your favorite podcasting apps. Now, without further ado, let's begin today's episode. Hey, Zichen, how have you been?
Good, I'm doing good.
I'm always curious because you're now in Princeton and learning about your master program, and there must be a lot of students, classmates, professors asking you about China, since US-China relationship is such a big topic. What have you observed for the last half a year or almost a year in the university? Have you noticed any shift in terms of discourses when it comes to China or not?
Well, so I'm in this mid-career Master in Public Policy program at the School of Public and International Affairs, SPEAR, which is formerly known as Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. So, my class is a class of 24 people, typically of 12 to 20 years of working experience. We come from, the United States and other countries across the world. It's a very international class. I think over 50% of us in this class are international students. For example, the U.S. military every year sends 3 officers to the program. The U.S. State Department every year sends 3 foreign service officers to the class. And we have like a Belgian diplomat, British diplomat, and NGO workers, media journalists. And so, in this class and in our courses at SPEAR, of course, China, as part of the international relations, occupies a very important space. But if you want to ask me at this point, which is, the 23rd of March, 2025, I think for the past 2 months, what dominates the discussion is actually domestic U.S. politics, because the inauguration of President Donald Trump in his second term really ushers in a lot of changes and uncertainties, including for students of a very good policy school. Many of them, American students, would want to work in the federal government. But there is now not just the ideological differences, but also because apparently the federal government is not recruiting many new workers. They are actually shedding a lot of existing workforce. So I think for many of the master's program students here and also in other US policy schools, this is something of more immediate concern to them. And I think when it comes to China, the issue is like the elephant in the room, because, whenever it's military or national security or economic statecraft or, even global health, China as the second largest economy and second most populous country on earth, there is no way in escaping from a discussion that has some bearing on China. So I think people are very interested to learn, what Chinese are thinking, how they see, for example, the second Trump administration, whether DeepSeek represents a breakthrough in terms of Chinese AI. And these subjects are all over the place, and, we talk about them all the time.
Cool. Talking about US-China competition, I think one of the largest stories or the most interesting stories of the past 2 weeks has been about Ka Shing's CK Hutchison's proposed sale of ports around the world, and most prominently including Panama. And what's so noteworthy was the Beijing's reaction to it, right? There was a commentary quite critical of this by Beijing-backed Hong Kong newspaper Tai Kung Pao, Da Gong Bao, right? And it was kind of non-subtle warning against the CK Hutchison Shing's business empire. And then I think last week was interesting because there is intensification of the debates, right? You have more of these commentaries, but you also have a lot of the arguments made against this type of thinking. What do you think of it? What do you make of it? There's a lot of things swirling around whether, how exactly did Beijing look at this? Why did CK do this? Did they inform Beijing? And then there was news about Beijing was trying to use the Panama case as a bargaining chip, which was kind of front run by Ka Shing, and that's why they were angry. There was a lot of rumors, right? So what do you believe in? What is happening here?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the origin of the news, which would be President Donald Trump's claim that somehow China was controlling the Panama Canal, and he was never very specific about the accusations. I think what people can find is that CK Hutchison, which is a publicly traded but ultimately controlled private conglomerate run by the Hong Kong-based business family. I think they have the right to operate two ports adjacent to the Panama Canal. They are not controlling basically who can pass through the canal. They are just running two ports that are close to the canal, which is, I think, the first thing we have to highlight. And there is no Chinese PLA, People's Liberation Army personnel stationed in Panama. It is the canal is controlled by the local government in the country. And so I think the rhetoric from the U.S. side at the very beginning is very confusing for people who really spend some time looking at the situation over there. But it's coming from the President of the United States. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, heeded the directions from President Trump and got on the plane and flew to Panama, after which Panama announced that it was withdrawing from a Belt and Road Initiative memorandum between the Chinese government. And then, the U.S. was publicly pressuring the sort of transfer of rights to run these ports. And then there was news that CK Hutchison was selling, I think, not just those two ports, but also other ports across the world, except those in China, to a consortium led by BlackRock. And that's the origin of the story. And after that, as you correctly mentioned, ran a commentary which was reposted to the Chinese government website, and then the newspaper published many more very harsh criticism against the deal, which I think they haven't been finalized yet. It's some sort of a initial agreement in principle, but maybe all the specifics, for example, how much the ports would be sold, those have been determined between the two parties. I think, the two parties are now under public pressure from the Chinese government. Whether they will, basically unwind the deal or proceed with it, or maybe building some sort of agreements to make sure that the Chinese governmental concerns would be addressed, that's still up in the air. And I think many people are very interested to see what's going to happen. And I think related to this development is also the proposals at the White House and at, I think, USTR or maybe other U.S. government organ, which basically says the U.S. are gonna charge extra fees for Chinese ships to dock at certain ports. I think that really provokes the paranoia in China, because the Beijing sees, the economic coercion basically to be part of a grand game of potentially disrupting and creating, obstacles for Chinese shipping. And China is like the number one global trader of goods. So the Chinese are very sensitive to these potential challenges. And that's one very major background why Beijing is very concerned about Li Ka-shing's sales of those ports. But on the other side, as you pointed out, it's also very clear that there has been pushback against Beijing's criticism, not just in Hong Kong, but also in Chinese mainland as well. Many people believe, this is just another business transaction, and it's, Hong Kong business tycoon is not the Chinese government. They should be free to make whatever business decision they want to make, conditioned upon, of course, their compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. And at least at this stage, I think most people are struggling to find what kind of, laws or regulations Li Ka-shing's family actually broke. And I think that this is very unfortunate for business tycoons, and not just in Hong Kong, but perhaps for business across the world. They have to adapt to the very harsh and even dark geopolitical realities that business deals will be seen from one side of the Pacific Ocean or the other side as having enormous political, even national security implications. And this is still something going on. And one thing I also want to highlight is that, the relationship between Li Ka-shing and his family and the Chinese government are perhaps not what many Westerners perceive. I think it's very commonly acknowledged among the Chinese observers that they don't have a very good relationship. I mean, the Hong Kong business tycoon doesn't listen to Beijing as a subsidiary or, someone who just takes order. And it's not just to that. It's that they have they could have some disagreements dating back to maybe the years of political upheaval and the social chaos in Hong Kong, and maybe even to some of the business practices in the Chinese mainland when the Li Ka-shing family develops real estate there. But of course, they have been playing a pivotal role in China's reform and opening up. And is a respected business person, a philanthropist who donated huge sums of money to the Chinese mainland by establishing, for example, Shantung University. His foundation funds the Changjiang Xuezhe Chiang Kang Scholar programs at China's Ministry of Education. And he made a lot of, contribution to education, to healthcare in China, but also to other parts of the world. So, I think we are all, as observers, are waiting to see what are the potential next steps here.
Yeah, what I found interesting is the kind of indirect or the way that the thing plays out, right? So immediately after the news of announcement that CK Hutchison is selling the ports, there was no immediate reaction from Beijing, right? It took many days, and to the point that I remember many foreign observers were asking, did Beijing approve this? Why did Beijing approve this? Did they talk to Beijing and all that, right? Remember, they assumed that, Li Ka-shing was close with Beijing, and which was obviously not true now. And just as you said, they may have a kind of uneasy relationship, right?
Yeah, I think at the time, I think we both observed at the time, for example, Chairman Rabbit, who is a prolific commentator on China's current affairs, and also has, a well-connected, let's say, public intellectual and opinion leader. He pointed out at the time before the deal was announced that, it would be impossible to believe there was some sort of coordination between Li Ka-shing and the Chinese government beforehand. And obviously, he would be the sort of people who are in the know about basically the sort of relationships
Yeah,
that we are talking
exactly.
about. Huh?
And then it was almost 9 days, I think, after that announcement, you saw this commentary from Da Gongbao. And which the choice of that was also interesting. It was not a official announcement from any government ministry, right? It was not a explicit statement. It was issued through a news media backed by the state, but then reposted by the state, right? This whole
Yeah, that's the Chinese way of messaging, I guess. It's never very explicit.
Yeah.
You need to read between the lines, but I guess at least on this matter, people did read between the lines.
Yeah,
huh?
I mean, it just seems to me that the Beijing was also kind of at a loss what to do, and they were trying to figure out how to respond. They were obviously not happy, but then they were also concerned about this. If they go it too directly, it will have concerns about the private economy, the foreign investment, and all that, right? So I just think this whole drama is very interesting, and just shows that business government relationships are just way more complicated than many people outside have assumed.
Yeah, I think in the New York Times report, which quoted some anonymous sources close to the deal, they were saying the Li Ka-shing family was basically targeting American buyers and excluding other potential bidders. But when you read the Da Gongbao commentary and when you read other commentaries where pro-Beijing scholars would say, basically you could sell it to, if you could sell it to, for example, some European shipping firms, this could have been like a much lesser problem for Beijing. I think that really underlines the Chinese paranoia, and its assessment of the uncertainties of China-U.S. relations under President Donald Trump, because the thinking goes that although BlackRock is it's not in the business of running ports, right? It's like a financial investors, and when they take the operating rights of these ports, the Chinese thinking is basically, they could somehow listen to the orders out of the U.S. government and implement the U.S. government policies to, for example, charge extra money for Chinese ships using these ports, or even stop the Chinese ships from being serviced at these ports. So these paranoia, maybe it's not paranoia, it's just, it could be legitimate concerns, because at this stage nobody knows. People used to take a lot of institutions and rules of the United States for granted, but no, it's changing too fast. And in many cases where, I think there was some recent article which says the United States is becoming much more like China. And
Yeah,
yeah,
actually, to that, I have been talking to some shipping industry professionals here, and who mentioned that this is actually not, the buyer is not just BlackRock, and actually the main backer of the deal is this large European port and shipping company called MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company, which has a very close relationship with BlackRock. So it is like a joint deal, but I think the fact that it is not purely European also makes it problematic, that because in the headlines it's BlackRock, right? So sometimes the headlines matter more than the substance, especially when it comes to official.
yeah, and let's not sugarcoat this. This is pure and simple economic coercion. I don't want these private companies running these ports, so you must sell them. It's coercion. It's not based on it's not based on facts. It's not based on rules and regulations. But of course, on the there are Hong Kong criticism of Beijing's stance on the issue basically says this is gonna be another blow to the confidence of the private economy. Basically, these private entrepreneurs, they free to make their own business decisions. That's the question thrown at Beijing at this moment as well. Huh?
Sure. And talking about business confidence, I think another major piece of news last week was this action plan for boosting domestic consumption that was announced, I think, last Sunday, and then in the Monday there was a press conference by the NDRC and Ministry of Finance explaining the policy. I've been watching quite closely at this because I think there was an interesting pivot, at least last year, when the Chinese government realized that domestic consumption, domestic demand is the most important task, social economic task right now. And so there was this kind of shift toward more and more demand boosting and consumption boosting policy instead of the production boosting policies. So I've been watching this trend. But I have to say, though, the policy document that was announced was, it was okay on the principle level, right? All they sounded all the right messages, but it was also nothing surprising too. I don't think there's anything surprising that goes beyond what was already announced during the two sessions and the government report. And I'm actually still waiting for more clear kind of policies, and especially at the local government's levels, right? What do you think of it?
Well, I think first of all, I agree with you. There is a shift in the policy direction because in the past it was all about basically investment, more infrastructure, and the upgrade of various manufacturing industries. So and now it seems that the Chinese leadership is indeed putting like domestic demand at the highest priority. That's the first thing. And secondly, as you said, there are not many very concrete steps that we are seeing from the policy directly and from the document directly. It's a document. What you are talking about is a document from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China as well as the State Council, which is the Chinese government cabinet. So in these documents from these two organs, typically those documents, traditionally, these documents are not filled with policy details, for example, how much money to spend by which specific government department. These policy documents do not serve those roles. They point to a direction. And thirdly, I think what people are waiting to see is that are there any very concrete measures to not just boost consumption, but most importantly, to enable people to spend money. So we are seeing, like, for example, notices from Chinese banks, which are now giving consumer loans at a very large scale, at very low interest rates to people, to residents. And you can very easily apply to get those loans, like 300,000 yuan and at a very low interest rate. But the question is that the problem? And I think many would disagree. Many would say for people really spending money, the key is to boost their income, not just their access to bank loans. Because if people don't have money to spend in the first place, it's unlikely that they would take on additional debt just to spend, on something else. So from that perspective, I think many are waiting to see if there will be, in the Chinese term, 真金白银, like real money devoted to boosting people's income, which could come in a variety of ways. I think an encouraging signal is from some local government document in Huhehot of Inner Mongolia, which actually, as a local government, they are giving very generous subsidies to new births, and the generosity of the subsidies have exceeded expectations. And so maybe there will be more like that coming out. And also, if there are any concrete measures to basically solidify, to strengthen the social safety net, for example, giving more subsidies to the healthcare fund, to the social security, and for example, Tsinghua University professor David Li Daokui mentioned a while ago to give basically like over 1 trillion yuan to migrant workers to elevate their monthly pension for farmers over 60 years old to get basically a much more bigger pension from the state coffers, from the Chinese social security scheme. So I think those are the things people are waiting for. But I think it's the positive news is that there is indeed a change in the policy direction, in the correct direction. Although I think this is actually quite typical of China, is that when they recognize something, they will be first at a very high level, macro level government document, and then followed by other lower level policies. And these changes may take time, and many times it's that the decision makers, they will be sort of forced to take the policy routes that may not be very conspicuous or very clear for them initially, but as more economists, more policy advisors, and including more international news reports emerge and analysis abound, I think that's the direction we are seeing now.
Yeah, I think this gradual change model is very important to understand for global investors because it takes time for a general shift in terms of direction or pivoting. It takes time for it to get implemented, to be realized. So you would need to take some more time and patience to observe and to have faith to some extent that changes will happen, but it will take some time.
Yeah,
So that will be
many of these foreign businesses, as we speak now, are actually represented by their CEOs in Beijing at the moment, right? Because yesterday, well, in Beijing time, it was yesterday's Sunday, the 23rd of March, there was a China Development Forum, which is an annual gathering of multinational CEOs and Chinese officials, where the Chinese Premier Li Qiang gave a speech, and they spent the Chinese political and commercial elites with their Western counterparts spend some time together, and the Chinese leadership would basically re-emphasize their openness to international investment. And I think I remember reading that Han Wenxiu, a high-level economic official in Beijing, saying very explicitly, we welcome international capital to come back to China. And this is when you have most foreign CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies in China. And also there was, just by the way, actually I think one son of Ka Shing is actually in Beijing at the moment for the China Development Forum. So yes, and although he doesn't seem to run the ports business directly, but I mean, if he is Beijing, there may be speculations if he would talk to the Chinese authorities about the issue, how they can resolve this in a more, I guess, amicable way. There are many European CEOs there, right? And not many American CEOs. And that's understandable given the current geopolitical, nobody knows where the wind will blow next. And there is a U.S. senator in Beijing who reportedly sought President Trump's blessing to be an envoy, but ultimately didn't get it. And he is in Beijing as well, meeting the Chinese premier, and maybe trying to play some bridging role over there. I think I read somewhere he also played some role in the first Trump administration when it came to engagement with China, because he used to be a business executive with experience in China.
Yeah, so what do you expect? There are rumors that Trump and Xi will meet maybe in June or something. Do you think it's in the works or not?
Well, I think we can only, so far we have to rely on like public available knowledge of the issue. I think there are 3 news articles that I remember. The first one was by, I think, William Jen at South China Morning Post, who basically had a lot of exclusives. He was reporting basically there could be some sort of meeting in April. And then we have Ling Wei at the Wall Street Journal, who reported that the two sides are exploring some sort of birthday summit, because the birthdays of the two top leaders are very close to each other in June. And then I think I was reading, I don't remember exactly, maybe the Financial Times or somewhere, which was saying actually there is no serious negotiations regarding a potential summit between the two countries are happening. So, I mean, it's very confusing publicly. And I think I've been here and I also talked to people. There are people saying that the two leaders actually had more than one phone call. So there is this phone call in January, which is publicly acknowledged, but there are people saying there were more than one phone call and maybe even other forms of communications between them. So it's just very difficult to speculate. And I think the because President Trump said very early on he would want to visit China in his first 100 days in office. And then I think there was also he or maybe other senior administration officials were saying, the Chinese leader could visit Washington, D.C. or maybe visit Mar-a-Lago. And I mean, honestly, we don't know. And I think the Chinese are concerned, although President Trump said very beautiful words about China, about his relationship with the Chinese leader, but he has so far put on 20% additional tariffs on Chinese exports, and there are various initiatives out of the U.S. government, including for example, America First investment policy, and then the potential measures to create difficulties for Chinese shipping firms or for China flagged ships to access U.S. ports to basically conduct maritime trade. And I think Beijing has reasons to be very cautious. And what kind of escalatory moves that President Trump may make. I think the worst case scenario would be for the Chinese leader to show up at the United States, and then President Trump or his associates would pour up some sort of surprises or even double down on hawkish moves against China. That's something that Beijing would not be happy to see. So I think on a technical level, their officials have to meet and talk and get some sort of mutual understanding on what sort of basically fruits that could be produced from the summit. Only with some sort of engagement of some concrete sketch of consensus will this summit between them take place. And maybe because President Trump has a lot of business friends, and it's not just maybe it's not just the administration officials, but also other actors are trying to play some sort of bridging role. For example, the visiting U.S. senator, or maybe some other business people. I mean, we don't know at this moment. Yeah, too many question marks, huh?
Yeah, too many. Let's wait for another few weeks. I think
sure.
Call it a day.
Great. Nice talking to you.
Great. So see you next time, Zichen. Hello, everyone. This is another collaboration episode with Pekingnology and Baiguan Newsletters. I am your host, Robert Wu, founder of Baiguan Newsletter and CEO of Baiguan Lab. And with me is my co-host, Zichen Wang of Pekingnology. Every week, we as two friends will share our own unscripted views about the top news items of the last week and top things to anticipate in the week ahead. You may access these episodes by subscribing to our newsletters on Substack, or search for either Peking Playbook or Baiguan Radio on your favorite podcasting apps. Now, without further ado, let's begin today's episode.